Well, for those of you who are wondering, today I've made the decision I've got to push through to the end of the chapter because the topic remains the same, and I feel like we've really focused a lot on this issue. It's not that it's not appropriate or something that we all deal with, because most of us do, unless you get to a certain age where those desires are so weak it's not really a problem. But the whole point is that there's probably no more self-destructive behavior that we can enter into than being in an adulterous relationship or violating the covenant of marriage. And we talked about, yesterday, of course, don't play with fire, because you will get burned and it will leave scars that will be not only on the outside, but scars on the inside that you'll have to manage the rest of your life. But he goes on in verse 30 to say it has this relational dynamic that's pretty self-destructive. He said, "Men do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his hunger when he is starving. Yet if he is caught, he must pay sevenfold, though it cost him all the wealth of his house. But a man who commits adultery lacks judgment. Whoever does so destroys himself." Now, it's interesting, because what does he say? Men will despise you if you do it. I mean, people will look at you and you'll become lesser in their eyes. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what happens. I guarantee it. People think less of you. They don't have as much respect for you because they realize you're not a man or a woman of your word. And as my father-in-law said, he stayed married for 73 years until my mother-in-law passed away, not because he was so virtuous as much as he decided that he was just going to be honorable and keep his vows. He couldn't live with lying to himself and lying to everybody else. And of course, the thought of how would that impact his kids? And I've seen the effect of divorce on children, and it's really painful. The whole lie that the kids will get over it. I mean, that's a total lie. All of the forensic evidence that's been done, all the psychological studies have been done, and we're talking about one study recently with over 1 million people who were the children of divorce, and the impact was devastating. I mean, it affects them in every area of life. They don't do as well professionally. They don't do as well relationally. They deal psychologically with problems. They don't know how to even navigate a lot of issues. And they have trouble even having meaningful relationships with other people and trusting other people. It's severe. It's a severe psychic blow. And he says, but to the man or woman who engages in it, he says, you're lacking judgment. In other words, you're not using your brain. You're using your sensory perceptions. It's an animal instinct. You're going down to your lowest nature, your most primitive instincts, if I can put it that way, instead of really revealing the spiritual mentality of a man of God. You see, the New Testament says there's kind of 3 levels of which people live their life. There's what they call the pneumatikos man, the pneuma, the spirit, the man who is spirit-filled, the follower of Christ. He has the Spirit of God living inside him, co-joined with his soul. And then there's the good man, the psychikos man. The suke is the soul, and his soul is that of moral, upright person. There are those people in the world. They just do the right thing because they were trained to do the right thing. And then there's called the sarkikos man. And sark is the word for flesh. The man who is driven by his animal appetites. And that's what you become when you get involved in sexual immorality. You're letting your animal appetites be the thing that drives you. And that never works out well. I mean, you'll find that you'll be eating from the trough of the pigs, and you'll wake up one day and say, how did I end up like this, in this prodigal moment of discovery? And hopefully someday you'll come to your senses, but I've seen people who don't. They just redouble their efforts. I knew one young man, I saw how God changed his life in so many ways, and then finally he just gave in to temptation. And it was sexual temptation, immorality, and then that led him right back into drugs and alcohol. And to this day, I think he's living on the street, a drug addict. Completely lost everything, lost his marriage, lost his kids, lost everything. And it's painful for me to see how that path went, after seeing him come so far in his life and accomplish so much and really be healed. to simply give into a sexual impulse, which led him back into all of his vices, because he kind of said, basically, he told somebody who saw him, he said, it's just easier. It's just easier doing drugs. And I think, I don't think that's really true. But he lost all of his strength of soul. Anyway, but he goes on to say what will happen. He says in verse 33 that blows and disgrace are his lot, and his shame will never be wiped away. I mean, you can repent for it, and you can be forgiven, but you'll never forget it. And you'll never be able to say it wasn't a bad decision. It wasn't a foolish choice. He says on the other hand, jealousy arouses a husband's fury. So the man who's been betrayed by his wife, or the woman who's been betrayed by her husband, they have a visceral hatred for the person who brought that destruction into their life. They will show no mercy when he takes revenge. In other words, they will have it in for you, especially if they're not a believer. And he says, and they'll not accept any compensation because you've taken from them that cannot be restored. I mean, that's the thing you need to understand, that to take somebody else's spouse is taking something that is not only doesn't belong to you, but you can never return it. It's like Judas throwing his coins back in the temple and trying to give them back to kind of undo what he had done. And basically the priest said, we're not interested. That's on you. He couldn't undo it. And he was so depressed, he went out and hung himself. And I think that that's the whole point, is that you bring upon yourself such hardship and judgment that there's no compensation, there's no bribe that you can offer, he says, no matter how great it is. Because what they're going to want is for you to pay the price for what you've done. And the price is so high that you'll never be able to pay it. And in fact, their biggest hope is that you will die and go to hell and suffer for eternity. Well, I certainly don't want to see that happen. And I'm not telling you that's the only choice, but I'm just simply saying that we should be terrified by the idea of giving into sexual temptation. We should be terrified by it. It should really be something that's so ugly that we want to run from it with everything that's in us. You know, I had an experience before I was saved, and I was using various drugs. It was in that experimental period of the hippie age, you know, and pretty much I ingested just about anything that anybody offered to me. And I remember the first time I took LSD, and you know, some people would ask me, did you have any bad trips on your LSD? And my response is, I'm not sure what the difference is, because I did it about a half a dozen times, and it was always seemed the same to me. It was weird and bizarre, and but it was never something I said, boy, that was fun. In fact, it was something that I stopped doing on my own because I thought, this can't be good for you. This can't be healthy. And I knew people who went over the edge and never came back. But the thing was interesting. I remember I saw a friend of mine who was actually my closest companion at that point in life. And it was almost like God opened my eyes to who he was. And I saw the demon that controlled him. Now, this was a guy, he was pretty wicked. I don't know how else to put it. He didn't have any conscience. And he would do some really, really dastardly things. And he used to even, you know, kind of shock me to the extremes he would go to. And suddenly it was like God opened my eyes. And for me, that was such a pivotal moment in realizing that there is a spiritual world out there. There is a spiritual realm. And, you know, it's one of those kind of things that if you're being tempted by something, especially sexual immorality, just pray that God would open your eyes to see what's below the surface, what's behind the veil, behind the mask. And I have found that oftentimes God does. And I recognize, I mean, I've even had this happening in car dealerships where this person is trying to get me to buy something, and I have this check in my spirit, and I've just prayed, Lord, just open my eyes. And suddenly I kind of sensed not a darkness, an evilness coming from this person that's not seeking to help me, but rather seeking to take advantage of me for their own personal enrichment. And I'm not saying, therefore, don't buy a new car, or all salesmen are that way, because there's a lot of godly men who sell cars. Please don't misunderstand me. But I'm just saying that God gives you that discernment, and evil can come to you in all sorts of forms and shapes. And just because it's sensually attractive doesn't mean that it's not potentially deadly. And that's the whole point. He says, beware of these things. Don't play with fire. Don't douse it if it's in your ability to douse it. But if you can't just extricate yourself from the situation and put space between you and the issue, just don't go there, and you'll be happier that you didn't. Well, I hope this has been helpful. It's been a tough subject, but I hope what I've shared will be beneficial to you. God bless you and go in His grace.